Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Ball. We want to be your source for intel, forecasts, and success strategies. This segment is brought to you by Barnes Creative Studios. If you want a video for your next project, check them out. They're fantastic at barnescreativestudios.com. Well, talk about strategies. That's one of the things we're going to talk about today. One of the strategies for real estate is zoning, changing zoning, permitting, special use permits, changing setbacks. And zoning can be an incredible way to increase value of a property. A lot of times as brokers, we're looking at properties, and one of the first things we think about is highest and best use. So you want to think about what you can do with that property. Well, today we're going to talk about zoning issues, and I've had an expert in the Studio One here with us today. We have Woody Galloway. He's with Galloway Law Group. And Woody, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Woody, you've been doing zoning for 30 plus years. That's what we started to call it, right?
That's right.
And so you've seen a lot with zoning, and it seems like one of the biggest things where I see people sometimes make mistakes is not understanding some of the key points of getting zoning changed. And one of those is kind of the emotions and how personal this zoning can be when you start to change zoning, can it?
It can be very personal because basically you're abutting somebody's property. Whether it's a homeowner or another business, you're next to somebody, and they care about their property just like you care about yours. And so that brings out emotion. That brings out a lot of things that bubble to the surface during a zoning action.
Yeah, and it can really take you by surprise. I remember an attorney talking to me one day, and he said, "Michael, we're getting together a bunch of people. We're going to try to fight the zoning on this development that's next door to my condo I live in." And I said, so next door to you, there's these kind of undeveloped, crappy thing where who knows what goes on that's not legal. And they want to build a beautiful, very nice project there that should improve the value and the people around you, and you're fighting it. And he was, well, yeah, it's right across the street from me. So it's like not in my backyard, right?
Absolutely. I had a case one time. One of the first cases I ever did was a single-family development next to a mobile home park, and the people in the mobile home park came out and opposed the rezoning. So you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I've been to some of the zoning meetings. It's funny, there was one guy that was very, very vocal about fighting nice developments going on in the neighborhood. And I happen to know, because I managed a lot of apartments at the time, that he lived in a nasty little studio apartment. He had, it's like, how's it going to really impact him except help him? It's crazy.
But that's his kingdom.
Yeah.
So it gets back to what's yours, and you want to protect what's yours. So you have to put your place in the adjacent property owner's place and find out what their mindset is, and try to adapt to that as you go forward with the rezoning. So.
And part of that really is getting the right team together, right? Like, I tried to rezone a property myself, and I don't have the patience. Don't hire me to rezone a property,
right?
Because I'll just tell people off. I'm like, are you crazy? But so how do you get the right team together for this?
So over the years, you develop a knack for who is good at what. You definitely need a very good engineer. You might need a team of engineers because you have environmental issues that you have to deal with. So you need, and you might have structural issues you have to deal with. So you need, oftentimes a landscape architect, a designer, and that can be an engineer, that can be a landscape architect to come up with a site plan. And then you need a traffic engineer to deal with the traffic issues, and you need all kinds of different things. You might have a PR firm that's involved. We've got several big deals going on right now that we've got PR firms involved because they are significant issues and they're going to be in the press.
And how important is it that, say, the architect, for example, have some experience and may be good with zoning changes, because they might be involved in some of the zoning, right? Some of the discussions about these projects?
Well, that's absolutely true. You have to have team members that can communicate. Yeah. If they can't communicate, then they can provide data or illustrations or whatever you need, but they can't really help you as an expert in their field to communicate the ins and outs of the zoning.
Yeah, I was rezoning about 5 acres on Lake Lanier in Gainesville, and just pulling out 1 acre to build a house. And the city said, "Oh, it'll be fine. It'll go fine." Well, we went to the hearing that night, and somebody who lived fairly close by came up and said, "Well, if Michael Bull builds that house, my future unborn child will die pulling out of the street that we pull out on."
Right.
And I'm like, "What? You're not pregnant. You don't have a child, but somebody in the future that might be born might pass
Right.
away because one house is built." What's some of the crazy stuff that you've heard at these meetings?
Oh, I've had all kinds of things happen at zoning hearings, from a doing a quarry where the issue was mainly traffic and some other issues, but this woman had a respirator, and she was the last speaker in a long list of speakers, and she gets wheeled to the front with a respirator, takes the oxygen mask off, on and off while she's speaking, and she just says, "If this quarry goes in, I'm gonna die." So, I mean, it's just one of those things where you're, okay, well, that ain't gonna happen. It's gonna go to court.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's amazing. And that example I gave, they actually turned it down. And that was the only reason that they turned it down, is somebody unborn that might get hurt or pass away somehow.
well, again, it's an emotional decision, and
Yeah.
so the politicians are reacting to those emotions as well. So,
Yeah, so how do you handle the politics side of it?
well, politicians are, you've got to put yourself in their place.
The politician's shoes.
Right.
Yeah, what are
And
they
so
dealing with?
when are they running?
Okay.
What are their issues? Who are the most important constituents in the area? Have you reached out to them? I mean, the worst thing you can do is to go in a shell and not reach out to anybody, and not try to deal with the issues. If you try to just ramrod it through, then you're likely to get beat, because politicians don't like that either.
Yeah. What about the press? I mean, that would seem like something that maybe sometimes could help you, and sometimes the way maybe it doesn't.
Well, I try to respond to the press, but I'd prefer that my cases stay out of the press. They tend not to. That's why I said that we have to have PR people, because the bigger cases do get a following, and the neighborhoods like to highlight their best issues, which may or may not be correct or put in the best light. So you have to be able to respond to that.
Yeah. We're talking with Woody Galloway with Galloway Law Group about zoning issues, and no matter where you are in the country, rezoning can be a fiasco. It can be valuable to you as well. So you talked about the emotions can flare up. Have you ever seen any dangerous situations that kind of come up in your 30 plus years?
Well, I had a partner that has had to be escorted in and out of the zoning room with police escort.
Wow.
I've done several cases that have had police in the room to make sure that things don't go crazy. We had religious issues become a big thing, and we were doing a mosque one time, and there was a big police presence, and there needed to be, because it was a very touchy, emotional issue that could have gone the wrong way.
Yeah, and you're working on big projects. So what are you seeing that's different than 5 or 10 years ago in some of these projects and zoning issues and developments today?
Well, as you have more and more development, you have more congestion issues. So that's probably the issue that is the hardest to deal with, because it's the hardest to address. If there just generally are too many cars on the road, and people are having a hard time getting from point A to point B, and they're sick of it, and they've been complaining for years to their politician, then to add a mixed-use development that has 1 million square feet and X number of new office, office folks, and you've got the residential component. then you're going to add a lot of trips.
Yeah.
And that's going to impact those that live around it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because maybe when it's done, maybe you work there, maybe you shop there, maybe you get in your car less, but it's NIMBY, right?
It's so amazing how I will see people say it's a grocery store. I've done a number of grocery stores that were very, very difficult to do. It's a grocery store. You know, it's a local thing. You're not going to go 10 miles out of the way to go to a grocery store.
Yeah.
So you're serving the local market, and then when it's done, you see all the people that opposed it, and they're there shopping.
Yeah.
So,
what do you say to the landowner, Woody, that has some land? He thinks he knows the best use for the land, let's say, is multifamily, and he thinks maybe I could shorten the time to sell the property, or maybe get more for the property if I rezone it. In most cases, should they consider doing that, or should they wait and pick a developer and let them drive the bus?
you usually need to have a developer drive the bus, but it depends on the sophistication of the property owner too, because I certainly have done a lot of rezonings for property owners that are sophisticated, that know what they're doing, know what the end user is going to want.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing, is knowing what the end user is going to want. 9 times out of 10 though, you're going to need to have the developer that will know what they can live with, because you're going to end up with conditions of zoning.
Yeah.
You're going to end up with things that the developer, whoever that may be in the future, is going to have to live with.
Yeah.
And that's going to affect the value of property as well.
Yeah, I think that's very key, because there's going to be, well, you have to use this setback, you have to do this much retail, you have to do this, and then the developer that's the highest and best paying buyer developer doesn't like some of it, and now you got a challenge.
Right. And you may be willing to think that there's no problem with the timing condition, that this goes before this. Well, that may totally change how the developer would go about the project.
Right. What do you say to a landowner that's selling land, Woody, and they're asked by a developer to give them a year to rezone the property, maybe more, maybe a little less, but they're giving them time to rezone it, and they're going to rezone it. It might be subject to an exact site plan, an exact use, it's rezoned, and if that zoning goes through and the developer doesn't close for some reason, the landowner's stuck with that use, that zoning, that plan. What do you say to that landowner to alleviate the fear of that?
Well, you need to be part of the process. You need to understand what the market is for that use, and understand whether or not there is another user that could come behind that first one if in fact they fall out. Timing wise, you need to give a developer enough time to rezone it, but you need to keep his feet to the fire.
Yeah.
So it needs to be a reasonable amount of time, and then you can adjust it later on. But as long as it's a reasonable amount of time, then you have some say in how long it takes, and you need to have some say in what those conditions say.
Yeah, well, that's a very good tip, and we've had some success. We sell a lot of land around the southeast of saying, all right, we'll get you the time, but we want to make sure you got the right team, that you got the right zoning attorney, that you got the right architect that can handle the neighborhood and handle the opposition, and also that you give us some timelines of things you're going to do and agree to those timelines. And if you don't hit one of those benchmarks, the seller has the right to cancel. But if you're doing what you say you're doing, you can have your year or 2 years that you need, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's right, and that's very key.
Yeah.
And you also need to realize what the political cycles are, because that has a big bearing on how things work and whether it's the right time to go in for zoning.
Yeah. Because
you don't want to be in the middle of an election cycle and have your case be the case where one politician is saying, we're against this, what do you say, Mr. Opposing politician? And then you got both of them against you, so you've got a tough situation.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, what's the funniest thing you've heard, to finalize our segment here, what's the funniest thing that you've heard that somebody come up and say in a zoning meeting or some opposition?
Well, funny, I don't know. I've heard some tragic stories where people get up there and they start complaining about, like you were saying earlier, about their unborn child is going to die. Yeah. Usually it's something like that, where they have some far-reaching not realistic story about what's going to happen, some tragic event that's going to happen if this zoning happens, and everybody in the room is thinking that's nuts.
Yeah, there's sometimes some absurd things. Woody, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Stay with us. We're going to have more on Not in My Backyard, some more zoning tips, some more information for you. Stay with us. I'm Michael Bull. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.